Hola, buenas noches. Bienvenidos a la sesión mensual de endoscopía. Cedo la palabra al doctor Reyes Dorantes.
Muy buenas noches, estimados socios, estimados amigos que se conectan por internet. Bienvenidos a una sesión más de la Asociación Mexicana de Endoscopía Gastrointestinal. Esta noche tenemos un programa excepcional, creo que lo van a disfrutar mucho, creo que vamos a aprender todos mucho. Quiero darles la bienvenida en esta sesión a todos los miembros de la Asociación Interamericana de Endoscopía, que a partir de ahora estarán más atentos y pendientes para sumarse a estas sesiones. Así es que, sin más preámbulo, le cedo la palabra a la doctora Ángela Saúl para que nos presente la sesión y a nuestros ponentes y profesores.
Hola, buenas noches. Tengo el gusto de presentarles a nuestro invitado de hoy. Él es el doctor Guido Costamagna, quien nos hablará de drenaje de la vía biliar en colangiocarcinoma iliar, 1, 2 o 3 prótesis. El doctor Costamagna es profesor de cirugía y jefe de la unidad de endoscopía digestiva de la Universidad Católica de Sacro Cuore en Roma, Italia. De igual forma, tengo el gusto de presentarles a nuestros profesores nacionales, el doctor Miguel Ángel Ramírez Luna, quien es miembro del Departamento de Endoscopía del Instituto Nacional de Ciencias Médicas y Nutrición Salvador Subirán, y a la doctora Angélica Hernández Guerrero, miembro del Departamento de Endoscopía del Instituto Nacional de Cancerología. Esperamos que la sesión sea de su agrado.
Buenos días a todos. Y muchas gracias por invitarme a esta charla por los amigos mexicanos. Es un gran placer y un honor. Pero mi español, mi castellano no es tan bueno, entonces voy a hablar en un malo inglés. Una mezcla de italiano, español e inglés, no. En un chiste, voy a hablar en inglés, por lo menos vas a entender algunas cosas. So the topic of tonight for me, today for you, is the topic concerning the drainage of hilar strictures, which constitute the so-called complex strictures. Of course, a stricture involving the lower common bile duct or the mid-common bile duct is easily overcome with one stent. But when we deal with the hilum, very often we have complex and difficult strictures that need a special attention. Special attention also because the area is a very complicated anatomical area. Not only there is the bile duct, and we will see that knowing and understanding the anatomy of the bile duct at this level is extremely important, but you have also the vascular portal vein and hepatic artery divisions, which may influence the decision on resectability of these tumors, which of course is the main aim, because the only potential cure for this tumor is to resect surgically, oncologically, radically these tumors. So the issues are, first of all, to optimize the diagnostic strategy in these tumors. The second issue is to define the appropriate biliary drainage, which may be palliative or preoperative, mono or bilateral, complete or incomplete, and we will see the difference, and then outline the technique for endoscopic stenting, the technique that we use in our setting. So let's start with the first point, how to optimize the diagnostic strategy. We can start with a practical example of a 61-year-old male with painless jaundice and a loss of 5 kilos in the last month, without past medical history and overweight. And the abdominal ultrasound shows a dilation of the left and right hepatic duct inside the liver. The proximal common bile duct is not dilated, and the distal common bile duct and the pancreas are not evaluable. Absence of liver metastasis and no gallbladder stones. So the same patient has a total bilirubin of 14 milligrams with mainly direct bilirubin, And the first point is that you don't have to rush on this kind of patients. Jaundice per se is never an emergency, is never an urgency. So don't go immediately to drainage, because the first thing we have to understand is this patient operable and is this patient resectable? Because again, the only way of cure this patient, if the origin is a cholangiocarcinoma, is to resect the tumor. And staging accuracy is very much impaired after biliary stent placement, because the ducts are decompressed, and because you create, by inserting stents, imaging artifacts. And this is stated also by the European Society guidelines on biliary stents. So, which imaging to assess resectability? Of course, we have the CT scan, MRI and MRCP, and then the PET CT scan. US experience with staging in these tumors is very limited, also in the literature, but it could have an importance, especially to evaluate lymph nodes around the hilar strictures. The accuracy of CT scan is quite high, between 70 and 95%. Also, MRI has a very high accuracy, and PET CT scan also close to 90% of accuracy. So, CT scan is almost always done, but you should also perform MRI and MRCP, between brackets PET CT, because this is only useful for lymph node metastasis, and it's not routinely requested to evaluate the resectability. With a CT scan, you will evaluate vascular invasion and the liver volume, and with MRI, the bile ducts anatomy, the invasion of the bile ducts, so the extension of the invasion of the bile ducts, and also the liver volume. So MRCP may represent a very valuable roadmap to address your biliary drainage if necessary. Then we have a problem of sampling. Sampling of the tumor may be done by ERCP, but as you know, the pool sensitivity for malignancy is very low, is around 59%, 60%. So in 40% of the patient, you will not be able to establish with accuracy the nature of the lesion. So other possibilities of improving the quality of diagnosis is today represented by cholangioscopy, because visual inspection and direct sampling, so the biopsy taken under direct visualization in cholangioscopy, has been shown to be able to increase sensitivity, so to avoid false negative, up to 80 to 90%. The second problem is to define the appropriate biliary drainage, because things are different if we are in the setting of palliation or in the setting of preoperative drainage. And then according to the extension of the lesion, we will see the differences between monobilateral and complete versus incomplete. So when to drain malignant hilar stenosis? Again, after staging. So after staging, we will see the tumor with the CT scan. We can define the vascular invasion by CT scan. We can define the volume of the liver that should be resected in case of resectability, and the quality of the liver also will be assessed, because we will see that the quality of the parenchyma, of the liver parenchyma, is also extremely important in the decision. And then by MRCP, we can depict very clearly the anatomy, the extension of the tumor in the hepatic hilum, and establish the level also of invasion. Preoperative drainage is not routinely requested because patients can undergo surgery, resection surgery, also if he is jaundiced. There is a threshold that we will see, but if the jaundice is not very important, you can go directly to the operating room. And again, the guidelines of the ESGE that have been recently updated in 2017 suggest that routine preoperative biliary drainage is not required, and the indication and route for preoperative biliary drainage should be decided by a multidisciplinary team based on patient characteristics and also, very importantly, on the institutional experience, because it depends how much and how wide is the experience with the endoscopic approach versus the percutaneous approach, and hopefully, of course, both approaches are available. So, which are the indication to a preoperative drainage? If the plan is to execute a major liver resection, so with a future liver remnant that is less than 30%, then preoperative drain is indicated. When you want to induce a compensatory hypertrophy of the remnant liver with monolateral portal vein embolization that will induce atrophy of the contralateral part of the liver that will be resected. When there is a deep jaundice, but actually if you go to the literature, there are different thresholds that are proposed, but usually bilirubin over 10 to 12 milligram is an indication to drain. And of course, if there is an ongoing acute cholangitis, never operate on a patient with acute infection, because this is for sure the origin of complications. So if the future liver is less than 30%, it's better to obtain a complete biliary drainage. And then if a portal embolization is performed, you wait 4 weeks, 1 month more or less, to induce a hypertrophy of the remnant liver. And then you can proceed to a very extended resection, like in this case, which was a right hepatectomy, plus extended to segment 1, so the caudate lobe, and segment 4, the quadrant lobe, but only after having induced hypertrophy of the remnant liver. Again, when to drain, before neoadjuvant therapy, of course, and in this case, it's better to use plastic stents. Whether for palliation, we will see that it's better to use metal stents, 1 or more metal stents, because all the evidence shows that these stents have a longer patency and a better functionality. Again, where to drain? These are difficult patients and should be sent to and collected by centers with high volume, with a multidisciplinary hepatobiliary team that is able to make the right decision in the right patient. So radiologists, gastroenterologists, endoscopists, surgeons, that all together have to take the decision on how to treat this patient. This is not an easy disease, and therefore it should be treated in very specialized centers. Then the question that is there since many years, how to drain? Unilateral or bilateral? I think that this definition is a nonsense, and I will show you why. We should speak about complete or incomplete, and not unilateral or bilateral, except in type 2. Everybody knows this classification that has been described many years ago by Bismuth and Corlett, and is widely used in the literature. Type 1 is a tumor that does not invade the main hepatic confluence. Type 2 is a tumor that invades the main hepatic confluence and separates in two, the left liver and the right liver. Type 3A, which is very frequent, is a tumor that invades the right secondary confluence, separating the anteromedial from the posterolateral sectors. On the left is more rare, but it can invade the conjunction of segment 2 and 3 and with segment 4. And type 4 is a very huge tumor that invades both to the right and to the left. So it's important to understand the anatomy, because if you don't understand the anatomy and the extension of the tumor, it's impossible to establish which will be the best solution for the patient and which kind of solution you are offering to the patient. So in type 2, that's easy, unilateral or bilateral. One stent will mean on the right or on the left. It's a unilateral, left or right, but incomplete, because you will leave a part of the liver not drained. So if you place two stents, one to the right and one to the left, this is a bilateral drainage, and in case of type 2 is a complete drainage, so without risk of cholangitis in the undrained segment or sectors. In type 3, unilateral or bilateral may mean different situations, and I will show you. One stent to the left is unilateral and incomplete. If you place two stents, or in this case, if you place a stent to the right, is only a sectorial right drainage, but also incomplete because the other sectorial branch and the left will be not drained. If you place two stents, you can obtain a bilateral drainage, but incomplete again, because two stents are not enough in a type 3, or a unilateral right and incomplete, because you place two stents on the right, but the left will be undrained. So in this case, if you place three stents in a type 3, you will have a bilateral and complete drainage, which is, of course, the optimum. In the literature, you will find mostly the definition of monolateral versus bilateral. But sometimes this will not allow to make the difference between a complete and incomplete. In this study coming from Korea, for instance, you see on the left that the stent patency probability is much higher and significantly higher for bilateral drainage compared to unilateral drainage, but the survival probability is only a little bit increased without reaching with a trend to statistical significance, but not reaching completely the statistical significance. However, if you look at the details of this series, you will see that bilateral, which should apply for a complete drainage only to type 2, in this series, type 2 were only between 14 and 20% of the patients. All the rest were incomplete drainage. The conclusion of this paper are these, that unilateral and bilateral drainage strategies by using metal stents had similar technical success rates, and that bilateral drainage resulted in fewer reintervention and more durable stent patency, and also probably to an increase survival. The other problem is to define the quantity of the parenchyma to drain to obtain good palliation, and to define also the quality of the parenchyma to drain, because this will influence the result of your drainage. Concerning the quantity, this is a study from almost 10 years ago, but still extremely important. And it's a French study that evaluated the volume of drained liver to be effective in terms of longer survival and less cholangitis. And they defined this volume to be at least 50%. So if you drain more than 50% of the entire liver, you will have a longer survival and less risk of cholangitis. So the suggestion of the European Society of GI Endoscopy, the clinical guideline on biliary stenting, also request a drainage of more than 50% of the liver volume in patients with type 2-4 bismuth strictures, so strictures invading the main hepatic confluence. But also suggest to avoid to opacify the biliary ducts that will not be drained, because if you opacify and you don't drain, the risk of cholangitis is extremely high. So, as in this case, only one stent was placed on the right side of this patient, and the left side was not drained. So you have to complete, in this case, using a combined approach, endoscopic and percutaneous, the drainage of the undrained segment to avoid septic complications. But it's also important to define the quality of the parenchyma. And again, the same paper that evaluated the quantity shows that intubating an atrophic sector has an increased risk of cholangitis, and this is statistically significant. So again, it's important to define the quality of the parenchyma before attempting any drainage. And like in this case, you see that the left liver is completely atrophic, and therefore the drainage was intended only to drain the non-atrophic liver to the right with two plastic stents, and then following the two plastic stents after a few weeks, we were able to place two metal stents in the drain segments. And that's the final result. Which technique for endoscopic stenting? Because we have different possibilities. First of all, which kind of stent? It's better to use plastic stents for preoperative drainage, and especially if no definitive decision about the curative or the palliative treatment has been taken. Because if you place metal stents, and we will see that in case of hilar stricture, it's better to use only uncovered stents. It will be extremely difficult to remove, even impossible to remove these stents. So if the drainage is a preoperative drainage, or if you are still discussing whether the patient is operable or not, please don't use metal stents, but only plastic stents. Avoid this mistake that is shown in this slide. Avoid to place a balloon and to inject everything, because if you inject everything, then you will be obliged to drain. So it's better to proceed step by step, try blindly on the basis and on the roadmap of a good MRCP with a guide wire. When you enter a segment that you with a guide wire, then you pacify this segment to understand which sector or which segment you are pacifying, and then you put a stent. And then you proceed to another segment, or in this case the left liver lobe, put a guide wire, then a catheter, and then a stent, and so on. In this case, it was a type 3 tumor, 3A. You see that the third stent was placed in the posterolateral sector on the right. And in this case, we obtained a complete drainage with plastic stents, 10 French plastic stents. So antegrade injection is to be avoided. Only retrograde injection, once you have passed the stricture with a guide wire and a catheter, is better to avoid cholangitis. For palliation, which kind of metal stents? Only uncovered. Why? Because with covered stents, the risk of occluding branches that come to the main hepatic confluence, for instance, branches of segment 1, that very often are very close to the main hepatic confluence, with a covered stent or partially covered stent, the risk of occlusion of these branches is very high, and therefore you can develop cholangitis in these undrained small ducts. So in case of palliation, only uncovered stents should be used for the hilum. The type of stents, it depends. You can use, you see here, 3 different types of stents, and these are all very effective. Another technical question is how to place the stents. If place side by side, or with the stent-in-stent technique, which is particularly popular in Asia. We prefer the side-by-side technique, and I will show you why, because in case of occlusion of the stent, the retreatment of this patient, so retreatment to remove sludge, which is very often the cause of occlusion, not only ingrowth causes problems, but very often only some sludge. If you place the stents at the same level in the duodenum, and that's also very important, with the distal part being at the same level, it's much easier to retreat these patients. And I will show you here a case of side-by-side stenting. Of course, you have to introduce first the free guide wires, then dilate the stricture accordingly, and then start usually with a first stent on the most difficult part, which usually is the left side because of the angulation, the anatomical angulation of the left branch. So start with the most difficult, usually the left. And once you have drained the left, then you start with the other difficult, which is usually the posterolateral segment, because again there is a nice angulation in the implant on the hilum of this big branch. And then the easiest one, which is usually segment 5 and 8, so the anteromedial sector that is in the same axis of the common bile duct. Retreatment, as you see in the endoscopic picture in the upper right side of the slide, stents have been released at the same level in the duodenum. Why? Because if you release in the distance inside the bile duct, this will be will render the recannulation much more difficult. So the intention is to leave the stents always transpapillary and at the same level to be able to recannulate the stents. And in case of dysfunction due to sludge, to ingrowth, to overgrowth, then you can recannulate the stents quite easily, and by using balloons, by using also RFA can be used to treat overgrowth and ingrowth in case of dysfunction. You can easily enter selectively all the stents and to clean them up and to remove the obstructing cause. And you see here, for instance, on the left, there was an ingrowth that was treated with a second metal stent inside the first one. In case of stent-in-stent technique, retreatment is much more difficult. This was we usually don't use this technique. This was a Chinese lady that had been treated in China, and then was traveling in Italy, and she developed an acute cholangitis. So she came to our hospital, and she had a stent-in-stent treatment of the stricture in China, and the right side was easily retreated, while the left was extremely difficult to cannulate, because you have to go through the meshes of the stent, and then you have to dilate the meshes of the stent to be able to introduce balloons or catheter in this more difficult part, and so the retreatment is actually not easy in these patients. And this has been shown also in some papers. This is a meta-analysis coming exactly from China of 4 studies comparing stent by stent and stent in-stent techniques with a similar performance, but they were able to show that retreatment success with a single procedure was much more successful in stent by stent technique, 92%, compared to less than 70% with the stent in-stent technique. So side by side, stents are much more easy to retreat. And this comes also from our experience that has been recently published in Digestive and Liver Disease. We review 134 patients with hilar strictures, malignant strictures that were palliated with multiple side-by-side metal stents. And you see that the overall mean survival was quite impressive, close to 1 year, because if you drain everything, the risk of cholangitis, which is one of the main causes of death of these patients, these tumors are not very aggressive. So the risk of dying from cholangitis is probably higher than the risk of dying due to tumor progression. And 55 of these patients, so more than 40%, had 1 or more retreatment due to obstruction. And these patients had the longer survival. That was 500 days in comparison to patients not retreated. You would say these are patients that survive more, of course, but probably being very quick in retreatment of these patients that present with acute cholangitis and usually acute suppurative cholangitis is probably something that can increase survival. And this is the Kaplan-Meier plot that shows that this was very significant in terms of prolonging survival. Which way to use, percutaneous way or endoscopy? Again, I refer to the ESG guidelines, and the ESG suggests that palliative drainage of type 1 and 2 is very often doable by ERCP. Percutaneous approach is very often required in combination with ERCP for strictures that are more than type 2, so bismuth type 3 and 4. And again, this should be modulated according to the local expertise available. There is actually a randomized controlled trial ongoing in the United States, a multi-center trial, comparing prospectively the percutaneous transhepatic versus the endoscopic retrograde biliary drainage in these difficult patients. The draft of the trial, the protocol has been published, but we don't have yet the results. And it will be very important to understand. So to conclude, and these are my take-home messages, concerning the diagnostic strategy, it's extremely important to remind that it's important to stage before draining. Again, jaundice per se is never, never, never an emergency. Only acute cholangitis is an emergency. So cross-sectional imaging should be done without stents. Once cross-sectional imaging has been done, you should try to understand the biliary anatomy with MRCP to have a roadmap and to plan the strategy of your drainage, endoscopic or percutaneous. Concerning biliary drainage, it's better to avoid to drain atrophic liver segments because you will increase the risk of cholangitis. And try always to drain at least 50% of the liver parenchyma. If you drain everything, I'm convinced that this is better. It's absolutely of paramount importance to drain all the opacified biliary ducts to avoid septic complications, because if you opacify and don't drain, the risk of cholangitis is close to 100%. And then there is no evidence. However, I would prefer a complete liver drainage, and I prefer to use this terminology, complete versus incomplete, instead of uni versus bilateral stenting, which doesn't make the difference in terms of clinical risks. Which stents? Plastic stents for preoperative drainage in patients with the neoadjuvant therapy planned, or if the surgically resectability is still under evaluation. For palliation, avoid to use partially covered or covered stems, because the risk of cholangitis is higher. And then in terms of technique, I prefer the side-by-side metal stent insertion, because it makes retreatment easier and effective. And I'm convinced that these patients, if they are retreated in emergency early after the development of acute cholangitis, you might be able to improve the survival. These were my thoughts. Thank you very much for your attention, and of course I'm ready to discuss this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Costamagna. Thank you very much for your presentation. We have some questions for you, if you are agree, please.
Of course, yes, with pleasure.
Thank you. As you mentioned in your presentation, this kind of patient is really complex for the endoscopies. What is your opinion about the confocal laser endomicroscopy and endoscopic ultrasound in order to achieve the diagnosis in these difficult patients?
Endoscopic ultrasound, there is little evidence in the literature. However, it might be useful for two indications. One is to take a fine needle aspiration or a fine needle biopsy through the duodenum, because the area of the hilum is well visible at that level. And data are scarce, but interesting. And the second indication could be for the evaluation of perihilar lymph nodes. However, again, the data in the literature are very scarce. Concerning laser endomicroscopy, again, I think it's a very difficult procedure to interpret. We have been part of a multi-center study with this technology, and the results are interesting but extremely difficult to interpret, and especially there is a very low coefficient of concordance between evaluators on the differential diagnosis between benign and malignant. Furthermore, the technology is very expensive, so I'm not sure that this will be the future in this setting.
I mentioned this situation because, at least in Mexico, it's very difficult in the multidisciplinary team to have the diagnosis. And when we talk about the patient with the surgeons, if we don't have histopathological diagnosis, it's very difficult to perform surgery in this kind of patient.
Yes, but you're absolutely right. There is still between 15 to 20% of resected patients that on a final evaluation, histopathological evaluation of the resected specimen, there will be no tumor. That means major surgery for benign disease, which is, of course, to be avoided. However, again, confocal microscopy is extremely difficult and also still quite expensive. I think that cholangioscopy, especially with the new disposable electronic single operator cholangioscopy, the spyglass, may improve much easily the diagnostic capability and differentiation between benign and malignant. But again, also in this area, we need more information and more stratification of the images in order to classify between benign and malignant.
Thank you. Another question, which is the role that you think has the radiofrequency ablation in these patients?
That's extremely interesting because it's a new technology and potential application in hilar tumor. The experience published until now refers almost only to retreatment of patients with occluded stents due to ingrowth. And the main problem of RFA is that, especially if done on the left liver, on the left system, but also on the right, the depth of action of RFA is difficult to delineate, and therefore the risk of injuring the vessels inside the liver parenchyma is quite high, apparently. And a group from Germany has reported severe complication due to late bleeding after 1 week of treatment, arterial bleeding, and with a couple of deaths also due to this complication. So we must be very careful in applying RFA, not uncontrolled RFA inside the liver, inside the intrahepatic ducts, while the risk for the extrahepatic bile duct is very low.
Thank you. As you know, there are recently some papers showing that in those patients with incomplete drainage by ERCP, use US-guided biliary drainage and not to use percutaneous drainage concerning the complication of this method. What do you think about the US-guided drainage of the biliary incomplete drainage?
Yes, of course, this is a very promising alternative. The problem is that the endoscopic ultrasound-guided drainage is mostly suitable for the left lobe because the access is through the ducts of segment 2 or 3. So for the right lobe, for the right system, hepatic system, the percutaneous approach, I think, is still the only available in case of failure of endoscopic drainage. But of course, the transgastric echoendo US-guided approach is extremely promising. But again, it's not a very easy technique, even if it is spreading in the world.
So, in your opinion, all the patients before ERCP must have pancreatography by MRI and volumetry by CT. Is that right?
In case of suspicion of hilar stricture, yes. Okay. Only in the evaluation of the parenchyma, but also in defining the anatomy and giving a roadmap for drainage.
I would like to say que usted habla muy bien español.
Habla un poquito, entiendo todo.
I am surprised that in the beginning of your lecture, I understand very clear your Spanish. So congratulations for that, because the Italian and Spanish are very common.
Absolutely. La próxima vez voy a hablar en castellano.
La próxima vez que esté en México, lo vamos a invitar pronto, va a hablar en castellano.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias por su presentación, por su conferencia. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Gracias. Adiós.
Adiós.
Bien, pues creo que la sesión ha sido de gran calidad y nos ha dejado mucha experiencia. Miguel, no sé qué opinas. Creo que estamos en centros de concentración donde vemos mucho este tipo de pacientes ya intervenidos fuera con la colocación de prótesis y a veces no una buena evaluación. ¿Qué tanta dificultad? Me gustaría aprovechar que ahorita no tenemos preguntas del público, pero si de los que han visto la sesión, si tienen alguna pregunta o comentario, con mucho gusto estamos aquí para poder pues intercambiar ideas. Pero quisiera aprovechar un momento el tiempo con Miguel para preguntarle qué tanto, lo ideal es esto, tener un team, un grupo de trabajo multidisciplinario en el que podamos apoyarnos para tomar decisiones en cuanto al abordaje, en cuanto al tratamiento y algo muy importante en nuestro medio son los tiempos de espera. O sea, el drenaje no debe ser una urgencia si no es una colangitis, pero qué tanto podemos nosotros hacerlo cuando tenemos tiempos de espera largos en relación al abordaje quirúrgico o incluso el abordaje con quimioterapia o neoadjuvancia con radioterapia, si fuera el caso. ¿Cómo están ustedes? ¿Cómo manejan esto? ¿Cómo lo ves?
Hola Angie, buenas noches a todos. Como ven, nos cambiamos rápido, miren, somos muy veloces. Pues sí, en efecto, este es un tema muy interesante porque sí que son pacientes complejos, sí que representan un reto para la gente que hace estos procedimientos y habitualmente son pacientes que ya vienen referidos a nuestras unidades con varios estudios, varias tomografías, ultrasonidos y a veces sin diagnóstico, a veces drenados sin indicación. Y no hay duda que en los centros grandes, en los centros de concentración de referencia, quizás lo más importante es tener un equipo de cirujanos, radiólogos, gastroenterólogos, endoscopistas de intervención que platiquen el caso y que se tome la mejor decisión para el enfermo. Como pudieron ustedes observar en la plática, sí que el abordaje del enfermo es muy, muy importante. Diríamos que la secuencia racional debería ser, obviamente, primero la sospecha clínica, después comenzar con un método de imagen tan sencillo como un ultrasonido transcutáneo. Y una vez que existe el escenario clínico y la imagen inicial sencilla como un ultrasonido transabdominal, quizás la regla debe ser mapear la vía biliar, es algo imprescindible antes de tocarla, ¿no? Si no hay indicación de drenaje urgente, lo ideal es mapear la vía biliar, mapear el hígado con tomografía y o resonancia magnética, colangioresonancia, para tener una muy buena imagen de la vía biliar sin prótesis. Eso es muy, muy importante. Y a partir de tenerlo mapeado, poder decidir qué puedo inyectar, qué puedo drenar. Claro, si el paciente tiene alta sospecha por envases clínicas de ser una neoplasia maligna de las vías biliares, la imagen es compatible con una neoplasia de las vías biliares, debemos proceder idealmente a decidir con esta imagen inicial si el paciente es potencialmente resecable o es irresecable. Si el enfermo es potencialmente resecable, debe llevarse a esta plática del equipo multidisciplinario para decidir el abordaje del enfermo, que debería ser idealmente quirúrgico. Pero bueno, desafortunadamente la gran mayoría de los enfermos que tienen este escenario llegan tarde a las unidades hospitalarias con enfermedades avanzadas en donde el tratamiento paliativo prácticamente es la rutina. Y luego viene el cuestionamiento de tener la evidencia diagnóstica, como platicábamos en la charla con el doctor Costamagna. Y aquí es donde vienen los varios métodos diagnósticos, porque tener un diagnóstico histológico de una neoplasia de la vía biliar sí que es algo complicado, ¿no? La mayoría de los métodos diagnósticos, su rendimiento oscila alrededor del 80-85%, ¿no? Dícese ultrasonido endoscópico lineal estándar, colangioscopía intraductal y ahora, como lo decía el doctor Costamagna en la pregunta, ¿no? Métodos pues sí más sofisticados, con buen rendimiento diagnóstico, pero a veces con bastante variabilidad interobservador, como la colangioscopía la endomicroscopía láser confocal, ¿no?
Sí, definitivamente creo que sí es muy complejos estos pacientes y tenemos que estar… tenemos que tener un abordaje muy claro de estos pacientes paso a paso, ¿no? Creo que sí es, como lo dices, lo más importante es tener siempre un mapa de la vía biliar para poder definir qué voy a drenar y qué no voy a drenar, o si puedo yo drenarlo, porque también esa es la otra situación. Es importante definirnos en nuestro ambiente, en nuestro lugar de trabajo, la experiencia que se tenga, ¿no? Si tenemos los accesorios y el equipo para hacer drenajes, colocar 3 prótesis metálicas o la experiencia para hacerlo, y no tenemos ningún radiólogo intervencionista que pueda ayudarnos a completar una lesión que está muy alta y que definitivo, aunque le meta 5, no va a ayudar en nada, ¿no? Al final de cuentas. Entonces, creo que sí siempre debemos ponernos en dónde estamos, cómo tenemos, qué características de lesión tenemos de la vía biliar para poder planear el tratamiento. Y algo que sucede, y que no sé ustedes qué tan rápido, pero nosotros no tenemos una rapidez en cuanto al abordaje quirúrgico, en cuanto a lo que se cuestiona siempre si drenar o no drenar, si va a perjudicar al cirujano, va a tener algún cambio este drenaje preoperatorio. Al final de cuentas se ha demostrado que no tiene ningún impacto en cuanto ni a la técnica ni a las complicaciones, incluso puede disminuir algunas complicaciones, pero mucho depende del tiempo de estancia o del tiempo de retardo de una cirugía. Si es una cirugía pronta, 1 semana, 10 días, es un paciente que puede tener, puede esperar sin un drenaje, pero si es una cirugía mayor, que creo que es lo que sucede mucho en nuestras instituciones, o la referencia, ¿no?, de estos pacientes a otro lado o tener un diagnóstico, la mejor opción es hacer un drenaje, pero creo que en nuestro medio así sucede, y la situación aquí sí es definitivo tener, antes de colocar una prótesis, tratar de tener un diagnóstico de imagen por colangioresonancia y dentro de la toma de biopsias o la imagen endoscópica, en este caso de la coledocoscopía, que bueno, es un tema también de no es accesible en todos los centros y tampoco económicamente es un método que se pueda hacer inmediato, pero estos casos creo que sí ameritan hacer como el combo, ¿no? Y ahí quisiera preguntarte un poquito, ¿hay algunas publicaciones en relación a hacer el rendimiento que puede tener diagnóstico de hacer un combo en estos pacientes? La colangiografía con el mapa de la vía biliar, la toma de muestra y el ultrasonido endoscópico para etapificar de manera local o evaluar buscar o etapificar estos pacientes si puede ser resecable o no resecable. De primera intención descartan mucho el ultrasonido endoscópico, sin embargo, algunos trabajos demuestran que sí este combo hace que sea más rápido el diagnóstico, que tengamos en una sola sesión el tipo de estadificar el paciente y el tratamiento, ¿no? No sé qué piensas tú, Miguel.
Sí, sin duda lo ideal sería, ahora sí que el escenario ideal sería tener todos estos recursos a mano. El ultrasonido endoscópico, como lo decía el doctor Costamagna, probablemente el papel fundamental es identificar si existen adenopatías alrededor del conducto biliar principal, alrededor del tumor, ¿no? Trabajos previos han mostrado que cuando se demuestran ganglios periliares, se toma biopsia por ultrasonido endoscópico, cambia el tratamiento del enfermo, obviamente, de ser una enfermedad potencialmente resecable a ser no resecable. Aproximadamente el ultrasonido endoscópico con toma de biopsia de ganglios cambia el 25 a 30% de la conducta de tratamiento, de potencialmente quererlos llevar a cirugía a convertirlos en un paciente irresecable que debe drenarse e ir a quimioterapia, ¿no?
Tenemos una pregunta ya para terminar, no sé si tengamos el tiempo. Nos hablan en relación a si los pacientes ahora hay más acceso a tratamientos de quimioterapia, radioterapia y que tienen una sobrevida mayor. Cuando tenemos una disfunción de estas prótesis, tenemos prótesis metálicas colocadas en un paciente que ya no es que es paliativo, pero que tiene una sobrevida mayor y que requiere un retratamiento. ¿Cuál es la mejor opción de tratar estas prótesis? Quitarlas, ¿no? Si ya tenemos una prótesis no cubierta, ¿no? Es imposible quitarlas, pero ¿cuál podría ser la opción de tratarlas? ¿Qué pensarías, Miguel?
Probablemente…
De retratarlas, más bien.
Sí, probablemente algo muy conveniente que estamos comenzando a hacer, las sondas, pues ya tienen algunos años en México, es realizar ablación por radiofrecuencia intraductal. Creo que es un buen método que aumenta la permeabilidad de la prótesis, prolonga la vida de esas prótesis, y hay un solo estudio que ha demostrado que prolonga también la sobrevida. Este es un estudio aleatorizado controlado que comparó prótesis metálicas con ablación por radiofrecuencia contra prótesis sola. Y sí, la terapia dual, incluyendo ablación por radiofrecuencia, aumenta la permeabilidad de las prótesis y prolonga la sobrevida en los enfermos. Obviamente, en este escenario que hemos platicado del equipo multidisciplinario, también los oncólogos tienen terapias de segunda, de tercera línea. Creo que por nuestra parte lo que podemos ofrecer es esta terapia intraductal con ablación por radiofrecuencia.
Y cada día, solo un comentario más, nosotros cada día más vemos este tipo de pacientes. Antes era la colocación de una prótesis y el paciente pues lamentablemente no tenía mayor tratamiento y iba a morir a su casa. En la actualidad hacemos retratamientos con mayor frecuencia utilizando esto o la terapia fotodinámica o incluso la braquiterapia, que es otra opción. Bueno, pues se nos ha acabado el tiempo, realmente ha sido una sesión muy interesante, pues agradezco al doctor Ramírez y que hayamos compartido esta mesa y al fin a todos ustedes muchas gracias y quiero le cedo la palabra a la doctora Ángela Saúl para que pues clausure esta sesión. Buenas noches.
Muchas gracias. Yo quiero dar un especial agradecimiento a nuestros profesores nacionales. Gracias a la doctora Hernández, gracias doctor Ramírez. Sin duda implicó un esfuerzo por parte de todos y esperamos que el resultado haya sido de su agrado. Y ahora cedo la palabra a la doctora Xochitl Quetzal Sánchez Chávez y al doctor Ángel Reyes Dorantes.
Bueno, antes que nada, muchísimas gracias por estar conectados con nosotros. Tuvimos a 197 asistentes de 12 países y continuamos con nuestros anuncios parroquiales. Recuerden que ya se encuentra abierta la convocatoria para la presentación de trabajos libres y de ingreso en la reunión nacional. Puedes registrar tu trabajo del 1 al 30 de junio en nuestra página www.amecendoscopia.org.mx. Ya se encuentra también disponible en la página web el micrositio de la reunión nacional, la cual se celebrará del 14 al 18 de septiembre en el Poliforum León. Y en este mes se llevará a cabo la trilogía AMEG, AMG, AMH, volumen 2, del 28 y 29 de junio, que se llevará a cabo en Querétaro, donde tendremos el taller de endoscopía, manejo endoscópico de hemorragia digestiva. El cupo es limitado, puedes inscribirte. Y en el mes de julio, los días 11 y 12, recuerda que se llevará a cabo en el Hotel Holiday Inn de Coyoacán, los ecos endoscópicos, teniendo un valor curricular de 15 puntos por el Consejo Mexicano de Gastroenterología. Y por último, nuestro programa líder en excelencia en la colonoscopía, que se llevará a cabo en el Hospital Regional Carlos MacGregor el 1 y el 2 de agosto. Te invitamos a seguir nuestro programa de sesiones en línea AMEG, siendo nuestra última sesión en el mes de agosto, el día 8, con el tema drenaje endoscópico de la vesícula biliar, impartido por el profesor internacional Douglas Adler. Y por último, cedo el micrófono al doctor Reyes para dar clausurada a esta sesión.
Muchas gracias, doctora Xochitl. Bueno, pues creo que ha sido una sesión sumamente interesante. Quiero agradecer al doctor Guido Costamaña, que se dio un tiempo y el esfuerzo para conectarse desde Roma. Creo que lo que nos enseñó es muy, muy valioso. Desde luego, muchas gracias a nuestros profesores nacionales, al doctor Ramírez, a la doctora Hernández y pues aquí a mis colaboradoras. Quiero agradecer también en esta sesión muy especialmente a los laboratorios Senociain, ya que gracias a su generoso patrocinio ellos hicieron posible y contribuyeron a que esta sesión se llevara a cabo. No me queda más que despedirme, diciéndoles a todos que se hayan cumplido sus objetivos de enseñanza, que son bienvenidos a las sesiones, que pueden revisar estas sesiones en línea. Quiero que en especial agradecer que ya tenemos la participación de más países y esa es la intención, que todos nuestros colegas endoscopistas de todo el mundo se puedan conectar. Creo que las sesiones tienen un excelente nivel y son de gran enseñanza. Así es que cerramos esta sesión, les agradecemos su presencia y nos vemos en la siguiente.